interests we talked about yesterday, and the analog and the physical, both how do we put it together with the digital, and sometimes when we want that pure analog traditional experience and the craft that goes into it. What does that tell us about branding in all kinds of industries? So we're going to have a great conversation with three fantastic and sort of different industries, fantastic businesses and speakers, and it's going to be led by Mike O'Toole. Mike O'Toole is the president of PJA Advertising up in Boston, does great work with a wide range of companies up there. He's also the host of a podcast series that's been going for a few years called The Unconventionals, all about looking at unconventional ideas in business and how do you build brands. So I strongly encourage you to check out his podcast, The Unconventionals. And I'm going to let Mike introduce this esteemed panel. Mike O'Toole.
Thanks, David. So I actually heard from a little bird told me that this was being referred to as the anti-BRITE conference, or a panel, because, I've been here for the last 2 days and it's been great conversations about, the big topics in, this is a conference about innovation and technology and brands. We've heard about digital transformation and big data and the Internet of Things, and we heard Linda Boff this morning, GE, one of the world's largest brands. Well, this panel isn't about any of those things, honestly, except maybe it's in part a reaction against those trends. I don't know if people saw, there was a New York Times article in January, and it talked about the Frightful Five. And those are the big technology platform companies, Google, Apple, Microsoft, that are set up to dominate so much of our digital lives. And I think the frightful piece of it is we depend on those things. They've changed our lives. We're all addicted to our devices, but we also worry about it. And so I think we increasingly crave the small and the handcrafted, and we root for categories that people used to wrote off at one point as dying that are really coming back in a major way. So that's what this panel is going to be about. And we're going to look at the revival of craft through the lens of 3 industries that have gone through a notable resurgence. And I think I feel really fortunate that we have not just any old brands, but 3 standout brands that are going to take us through today. Why don't you help me welcome our panelists? Why don't you guys come on out, guys? So John Kimmich is the head brewer and co-founder of the Alchemist in Waterbury, Vermont, which is, it's got a range of beers, but is the brewer of Heady Topper, which has been named the best beer in the world several times. Bridget Russo, who heads up marketing, chief marketing officer at Shinola, the Detroit-based maker brand. And Ben Blackwell, who's chief archivist and was the #2 guy at Third Man Records in Nashville. So I wanted to actually start by just letting you guys introduce yourselves a little bit for people who are not familiar with your brands. And John, we'll start with you.
All right.
So yeah, tell us a little bit about the Alchemist.
Sure. My wife Jen and I, were sitting right over there, the 2 of us started in 2003 a very small brew pub in the town of Waterbury, Vermont. We did what we did. We worked hard. We ran a very successful restaurant. Worked our brains out. We were raising a child, and that pub was destroyed in Tropical Storm Irene that came through about 4.5 years ago. Thankfully, at the time, we were building a production facility to package one of our beers for the first time. So up until then, we were draft only. We did no beer to go. You only ever got our beer if you came and visited our restaurant. So it was a very good timing, to say the least, that we sold our first packaged beer 2 days after the tropical storm wiped out our restaurant. So thank goodness for that, because otherwise we would have both been looking for jobs. So we have been doing that for the last 4.5 years, and we are about 2 months away from opening a second production brewery, which will then have a place for people to come see us and see what we do and visit us.
So there's about 10,000 barrels in that second brewery.
Yep, so we do about 9,000 barrels a year now, and the current brewery, this second brewery, will have just about the same production.
So it sounded like that there were a few Hetty Topper fans. There's people who know Hetty Topper. There's at least, yes, that's good. But it isn't just any craft beer. It really is a beer that people go crazy for. I live in Boston, and I will admit to being a beer tourist. I've gone up to the 4-hour drive, and you have to time it out because Hetty Topper is distributed through a few local stores, and if you get there by 9:30 and they start selling by 9, you might miss it. And John, I was wondering, do you have any stories about just how crazy people will go to get Hetty?
There's a lot of crazy people out there, that is for sure. We've experienced a steady amount of growth and notoriety from the day that we first started doing this. The first time I brewed Hetty Topper was early in 2004. And yeah, I can tell you tales of long lines and stuff like that, but the story that I find fascinating is the first time that Jen and I realized just what was going on, and that there was something going on outside of us, outside of our business, that we had, before then, had been pretty unaware of. I had just finished brewing a batch of beer. We split schedules, so we had a small child. I would go in early in the morning, I would brew. Jen would bring our son in just about when I was done. I'd take home, she'd take over, she would run the restaurant for the night, and I would go home with our son. So I had just finished brewing, I was up at the bar, I think I was cleaning a line, maybe putting a new beer on tap, and a gentleman came in just as we opened, and he sat down, and he ordered a Hetty Topper. And I said, oh, I just put that on today. He's like, yeah, I know. I said, oh, okay. So he had seen my tweet the previous day that it was on. He said, I'm from Florida. I said, oh, great. Are you here, what brings you to Vermont? He says, this brings me to Vermont. I said, you gotta be kidding me. I said, you came here for Hetty Topper? He's like, I bought my ticket last night because I got your tweet. I am here just for this beer, and I leave tomorrow. He sat at the bar for 8 hours that we were open and drank as much of it as he could, and that was it. Out the door he went. And I mean, Jen and I the next day, I said, can you believe that dude bought a plane ticket just to come up and drink that beer? I mean, it really blew our minds, and that was in the early days of when some of the social networking websites, the beer websites that exist, that was in the early days of those. And so, it has grown. You see how people can communicate and talk about new things that are out, and how quickly word spreads, and that was a big eye-opener.
Yeah, and I think it's actually a great point, because, in a way, you could look at all of these brands as sort of fiercely analog, but all are really shrewd users of digital and social media. So let's turn to Bridget. So Bridget, you run marketing at Shinola. Just tell us a little bit about the company.
So Shinola was started, we built a watch factory in Detroit in 2012, and really our intention was to make products in the US and also to create jobs. We started with watches, we also do bicycles, journals, in fact, that are sold here in the bookshop. And we are also launching audio incidentally, a turntable this September. So we really look at ourselves as an American design brand.
Yeah, with a range of products.
That's a beautiful watch, by the way.
Oh,
And here's a beautiful notepad, so you guys are all over the place. Actually, John admitted that backstage that he had ordered some Hetty Topper that was supposed to arrive, so we'd be drinking it on stage, which really would have made this the most fun panel I've ever. I think you guys got in the way here. But so I wanted to ask you, Bridget, if you think about craft as exists somewhere at the intersection of high quality products and mission or story, you had that balance at different parts of your career, right?
definitely. I was lucky enough back in 2004 to work with Bono and his wife on a small brand called Eden that they started. And they're really pioneers in the area. Back then, the idea of conscious fashion just didn't exist. And that's when I really fell in love with this idea of storytelling through the supply chain. I come from a fashion background where, in fact, there was a curtain. You never communicated where you manufactured your products or showed pictures of who was making the product.
Yeah.
And now that's all changed.
Yeah, and that's huge part of Shinola's story.
It's at the heart of what we do, absolutely.
Mr. Blackwell, Third Man Records. We know it's Jack White's record label. You're obviously pressing Jack's records, but you produce records for other genres as well.
Yeah, we do a little bit of everything. I like to say a good record label should be like a good record collection. It's not just one thing. You should have rock and roll and country and hip hop. Maybe people know or have a friend who just loves rap music, and it's great if you want to talk about rap music for a half hour. But then you want to say, hey, don't you like AC/DC? Can we talk about that? That's kind of a simplistic way of describing our approach. We love bits of everything, so we release bits of everything.
What's the least expected genre that you guys?
We've released a record with Insane Clown Posse. We've done. It was shocking. We literally had people said, "I will never buy any of your records again because you put this on." And it was an interesting collaboration with those guys rapping. It was the A side was a reinterpretation of a Mozart song. Mozart kind of has this little known side where he did his after hours stuff. So he had a song called Leck mich im Arsch, which translates in German to lick my ass. But he's Mozart, so he gets a free pass, right? But when ICP sings it, people get mad and offended, and they hate him.
Well, I think it's true for you. Craft brands are not trying to sell to everybody. Right? They're trying to talk to your fierce fans.
Yeah, so we've done Insane Clown Posse. We've done spoken word instructional records with burlesque dancers or auctioneers, kind of talking about their craft, all the way through obscure reissues of punk bands from the late 70s that barely existed, that no one's ever heard of. If it seems interesting to us and it compels us, we'll put it out in hopes that maybe it'll compel some other people. Another great example is we have a 45 out by, we say it's by Carl Sagan. It's a song called The Glorious Dawn. And where it comes from is there was a producer who took spoken audio of Sagan from his Cosmos series. Stuff like, if you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, first you must invent the universe. This guy took Sagan's words and put them through filters, vocoders, things like that, and kind of gave it a little bit of a melody and also put a backing track to it. And posted it on YouTube. And we saw this pretty early on. There was maybe like 20, 30,000 views. And Jack White, my boss, saw that and said, man, we have to put that on 45. It's amazing, it's beautiful. Okay, absolutely, let's do it. We contact the producer, who's ecstatic. We contact Sagan's estate, who I'm sure have never dealt with this kind of request before, but they were game for it. And we go to press a record. At that time, an initial pressing for us on a 45 would be maybe about 2,000 copies. Hedging our bets, always keep in mind the dictum that you can always repress more records. You can never take unsold records back to the plant and get your money back. Usually we press 2,000 at that time, so let's just press 1,500 because I don't really know what the market is for a record by a dead astronomer. So we sold those first 1,500 out in probably about 2 weeks, and then for the next 3 years we couldn't keep it in print. We sold over 10,000 copies of that on 45, 500, 1,000 at a time, keep on doing it. The video has, I think I lost count at about 10 million views on YouTube. This is a thing that if you were looking to make money, if you were looking to, how can we really blow the doors off, you would never go towards that.
That'd be the opposite of what you do, right?
Exactly.
What's interesting about that is, and you guys we all have stories that way, is you operate in markets that used to be dominated by what's going to sell the most, and how can we bring it down to lowest common denominator taste, and each of your businesses does something the polar opposite. So I actually wanted to, and this is such a short time, we have 30 minutes left, it's ridiculous, so let's get to it. What's behind the revival of craft? I mean, you guys have 3 very different categories, but what's in the culture that people are craving these brands? Bridget, can you take craft?
I think, with everything, if everything goes in one direction and everything's digital and people are feeling in some ways more disconnected than they were before, connected in one way and disconnected in a human way, it's sort of natural for people to crave and want that human experience. You know, retail isn't dead, just the experience is different. So I think as long as we're human beings and want that sort of connection, to me it seems only natural that sometimes, you know what, I just want my watch to tell me the time.
Smart enough, right?
Yes, just smart enough.
So it's maybe a little bit of a reaction against the digital domination that we all sort of subscribe to but rebel against. John, when we were talking, there's some other factors too, right? You're talking about growing up in the 70s and the kind of options we had as consumers.
I think it's a cultural rejection of this watering down of our society that was going on for years. You know, all of a sudden, you know, as a child, it's who's going to eat Wonder Bread? Who's ever going to eat that again? You know, and so I was raised in the midst of when it had already happened. You know, when the giant corporations had taken over and had streamlined everything, as you said, dumbed down everything to the point where they think everybody is going to like it. Everybody's eyes were opened up at some point along the way where they reject that and say, no, there's so much more to it than that. It's not just looking at your wrist and telling what time it is. It's not just delivering alcohol to your bloodstream. And it's not just flipping through a zillion digital songs. People need that connection to quality and to realness, and I think that's what drives a lot of it. You want to be able to sit down and take the time and to slow down and listen to a complete album, which, who does that anymore? Not enough people. And the appreciation of a finely made timepiece, it's not about just having something thrown out at you as cheaply as possible.
Not just about accuracy. Yes. Well, I think those are, anything you would add to that? What's behind it?
I would just say if he wants to see people that eat Wonder Bread, well, come down to Nashville and still very, very
Well, you know, what's interesting too is like, because there's a sense that people are smart about jumping on fads, right? So craft is a fad now too. So you have, you have a lot of imitators, Bridget, and Warby Parker's a great brand, and how many dozens of companies have popped up to imitate what they do. But I think there's something about more permanent resetting too. Like in the 70s, you could choose from like 7 beers if you were in America. And I know that the scale for being able to be a brewer was like 1 million barrels. You're happy at 10,000, right? So
very happy. And yeah, I remember as a kid going to a restaurant and the waitress would come up and say, Schmitz Schlitz with Michelob. And those were your choices, you know? And, you see it in the food industry as well. There is an appreciation for quality. There is a desire to learn where these things come from, who makes them. What is that spider web that leads out from what you create? You know, there's a lot of people. It's not just us. We have a trail of people behind us that help us do what we do, and they're mostly very like-minded people, from small hop farmers in Oregon to it's a family-run malt business in England that supplies us our barley. So, it's the world around, and it's an issue of quality.
Yeah. Well, another topic that I think is really important here, we talked about it a bit, Bridget, is balancing the product story with the sort of mission or vision behind it. And somebody said yesterday that brand is now changed. Product marketing and corporate image were separate. Now they're coming back together. For your company, it's never been separated, right? It's hard to imagine your product story absent your mission, Bridget.
It has to be part of what you do every day. So from HR to marketing to e-com to manufacturing, that has to be at the heart of what you do. I learned through Eden somewhat the hard way in that we had this great mission of increasing trade in Africa and creating jobs in Africa, but no one thought about the product. So it was sort of an afterthought, and we sort of naively put some product out there that we all weren't that proud of, and it didn't sell. And so it's great that you have this lofty goal, but ultimately if it's driven by the sale of a certain product, that product needs to stand up to that mission, because ultimately you're making a promise to the consumer. And so not only, do you need to realize your mission through what you do socially, but also in those products. So that's why, for us at Shinola, creating a product first and foremost that's made to last, that is care in everything that we do, including the box that it goes in, it has to be part of everyone's job at the company.
So you're going to make all the products you guys sell? Like you won't license, or is that part of it?
We don't manufacture everything ourselves,
Okay.
so we do assemble the watches and the bicycles and make some of our leather goods in Detroit. Otherwise, we work with partner factories in the U.S. Not all of the components come from the States, some of them come from overseas, just simply there isn't the availability of the quality and the quantity that we need.
Yeah. Well, there's something too about Detroit in particular, and Ben, you should bring in on this too. And I would say just generally, it's almost impossible to separate craft from place. And I think one thing craft has done is bring a sense of place and location back to products, which I think is really great. But can you talk about like that side of it? How many jobs? You guys are committed to the manufacturing in Detroit, right?
Yes.
And
in the U.S.
In the U.S. in general.
Specifically in Detroit.
And did you say there was some research that asking consumers if you would go out of your way to buy American, and I think it was sort of split, but people would go out of their way to buy in Detroit or pay more? Is there something?
Yeah, it's a little bit, it was before my time at the company. I started sort of just after the beginning, but apparently there was a focus group that we did down in Dallas, and there was pencil pen, something like that. Same price, sorry, not the same price, looked the same. One was made in China, one was made in the USA, one was made in Detroit, and we asked which one would you pay more for, and people said, between made in the USA, made in China, made in China, that they would prefer the cheaper made in China, that made in the USA really wasn't meaningful, but that they would pay more for made in Detroit. And I think that just goes down to people want to know that level of detail. I think over the years, made in the USA has become diluted, and then what exactly does that mean? It's something that, at least today, people are unsure of. Whereas made in Detroit, even if I'm not from Detroit, all of a sudden that conjures up something very specific in my mind, and I feel more of a connection to it.
Yeah. And you guys, you're a maker business too, Ben.
Absolutely. So we're our outpost in Detroit is actually 2 doors down from Shinola's. Call it your flagship. Flagship. So it's a very fun block there, but our primary focus for the first 7 years of the business has been acting as a record label, doing occasional live performances and merchandising, but mainly putting out records. And things have gotten so complex and protracted in terms of turnaround times in the vinyl business over this time period that we are actually expanding and setting up our own vinyl factory in our building in Detroit. So we'll have a record store you can walk into, you walk down a hallway, and you'll see these presses spitting out vinyl records. Wow. To the tune of, these are the first new vinyl press machines made in about 35 years. And these are the first new ones in North America in that time. So that's kind of our focus. I've for years and years said, I want to be involved, I want to be a certain aspect of DIY for a record label, but I don't want to run a pressing plant. There's too much science involved, steam pressure, engineering. Once you mention PSI, like I have to tap out, I don't know anything more than that. But it became this thing of, well, why wouldn't we do this? We have so much issue with turnaround times at plants across the globe. Whereas when we started, I could, with push, get a record turned around in 3 weeks, really, really pushing it. Now if you walk into basically any plant in the US, and their stated public turnaround time is 14 weeks.
And that's a big thing, right? Because people probably know these numbers, but say the lowest point of records, mid-90s to 2000s, less than a million records sold in this country. It's now more than 14 million.
Yeah.
And the record factories are working through shifts, right?
Well, yeah, these are machines too that were only ever made to run 8 hours a day, so that you're dealing with having to constantly repair the machines that are, most plants are operating with the finest that mid-1950s and 1960s technology has to offer. So it's, for us, Third Man, we've been open 7 years, I think almost to the day. We've released over 350 titles. Across those 350 titles, we've pressed 2 million pieces of vinyl. To put that in perspective, the pressing plant that we primarily use, United Record Pressing, which is 2 miles from our office in Nashville. So very, very close, a very, very good working relationship with them. Their biggest customer is Universal Records, big, huge, multinational corporation. Second biggest customer is Sony, big, huge, multinational corporation. Their third biggest customer is Third Man Records, a label that didn't even exist 8 years ago. And I think, one thing is because we're a good face for vinyl. No one really looks at Sony and says, man, they're doing so many great vinyl things. It's kind of like, it's so big, it's kind of hard to really get a feel on. But for us, we do smaller, we do interesting, we do craft things, and that gets noticed a lot more.
Yeah, well, there's also an interesting thing how the craft side of your industries, I say beer and records, are really driving the bus these days in terms of the most interesting parts of the industry. Craft is what, like 11% of beer by volume, but like 15 or 16 by sales. I don't know if I have the numbers right.
To 20%.
20%?
It's funny because there's an article in the paper today that talks about InBev and how their attempts to buy up craft brewers, and when they bought Goose Island out of Chicago,
Yep.
and 10 Barrel out of Oregon, and you see them. They're scrambling because they see their market share disappearing, and to them, I don't know if they totally understand why. I'm sure they do, but here they are. They're grabbing large craft brewers, which is fine, but craft brewing as a whole isn't being driven by these large craft breweries. It's being driven by the little guys. The innovation,
Yep.
the creativeness is coming out of these little places, and it's not going to change. I don't. Now that the genie is out of the bottle, people aren't going to go back to drinking Schmitz, Schlitz, or Michelob. They are hooked now, and they recognize the quality. And what you were referenced before, the idea of quality being the driving force. To us, quality is everything. The marketing has all. We don't have a marketing department. It's Jen and I with our ideas and making our ideas real and bringing it to fruition. But at the end of the day, none of that matters. If one of our customers opens a can of our beer and feels as though it has slipped and is not what it used to be, you've got nothing. All the marketing in the world isn't going to change that. Our end of the bargain is making sure that that beer is absolutely perfect. And if you buy it from one of our authorized distributors, you can be assured that it is going to be perfect. If it gets messed up, it's because you messed it up. And all of our growth has driven out of that. It's word of mouth. People talking about, you've got to try this beer.
Well, so I want to. I think there's a question about scale in there too. That like, what size can you not do that stuff anymore? But I also wanted to make a point that you don't do any marketing, and most small craft brewers don't. You don't have to. They're good. But it's interesting to see the impact. So now Coors Light is now creating advertising for women. So where women are not just playthings, but they're actually the target of the ad, right? And in the piece that I read about that said, actually credited craft brewers with that, saying not that craft brewers have done a lot of advertising to women, but they've always just understood that you got men drinking beer and women drinking beer, and we're going to treat them the same. And your consumers get the difference, right? They're not being talked down to, they're not being excluded, and I think the rest of the market's trying to catch up.
I don't think you've seen any craft brewers putting bikini-clad women dancing on the beach with their
Right.
beers either.
I think that's right.
It just spoke down to 50% of the population.
Right.
You know, it's kind of a crazy way of thinking. It's an outdated way of thinking.
Right.
And I think most of us have kind of moved beyond that.
Right. We're starting to, at least the big guys. So back to scale. So, and I think on the stage we maybe have two slightly different perspectives about scale. And so Bridget, your mission, Shinola's mission, isn't about being, or doesn't limit you to being small. I think you guys want to get bigger, right?
We definitely do. In order to be sustainable and to create the amount of jobs that we want to create, we absolutely have to be a certain size. But I do think there's a certain point where too big is too big. And I think that's where, you know, many companies kind of fall into problems where it becomes less about people and more about the bottom line. And that's when decisions are made, not necessarily good long-term decisions. But yeah, we definitely have to reach, I don't know exactly what that number is, but we have to reach a certain size in order to sustain our business. We built a pretty big organization. Being in all these different categories is not easy. So,
Right.
And ultimately, we do want to create those jobs.
And is there a way that you guys think internally about how do you maintain that balance? Like you're getting bigger, but you're staying true to.
Every day we talk about it. You know, it's something that every single person in the organization, and certainly the executive team, talk about how do we make sure within the organization that people still feel connected, that there's still that human touch. How does that feel 20 stores in, 100 stores in? So it's something that we talk about and think of every day, and it's a priority, basically.
Yeah. And John, I think, and I know you guys a little bit, that your goal is to grow 0%, right?
Our goal is to create amazing jobs, regardless of whether it's 2 jobs or 20 jobs, and to give our employees a quality lifestyle. We have a lot of employees, more than a lot of companies would say that they need. But for us, we're very fortunate that we can sustain something like that, and we can give people something to truly take pride in. Every one of our employees would do anything for us. If there was anything that came up, they would volunteer to do it. It's not like, oh my God, I'm being asked to do this. We treat them with the utmost respect. We give them amazing benefits, and we create an atmosphere that we don't want our employees to ever dread coming to work. I've worked so many horrible jobs leading up to owning our own business, and I always promised myself that I would never ever forget what that was like, to get dressed, to go to work, and just be like, oh my God, I have 7 hours and 59 more minutes of this to go. I mean, that is a brutal existence, and it would kill us if any of our employees ever felt like that. So we go out of our way to put family and lifestyle first. If collectively our employees can work together and work 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week, take the 5th day off. If the work is done and it's done the way we need it to be done, we give them the freedom and the flexibility to enjoy life and not just work their lives.
Well, and I think that makes a ton of sense, and I think probably that's something that would be echoed across the stage here just from previous conversations. Part of that is scarcity, though, I would think. Like you guys, it's very hard to get a petty topper. You told the story about the guys from Florida. It mean scarcity keeps the demand high. Fundamentally, you have to have a great product first, right? But the fact that it's harder to find means that, like it's hard in New York. If you want to go, you got to go up to, and so I think that I'm interested in that too. Is there a sense that scarcity can mean something rare that is worth going out of your way for? And you probably have, well, your 45 example is connected to that.
Well, absolutely. Everything that Third Man releases on vinyl, we kind of have 2 different lanes that we operate. One is the limited edition, usually colored vinyl version of a record, and that can be as few as 150 copies, probably no more than 300. And then we have our standard issue black vinyl that's in print for a very reasonable price forever. So it doesn't matter how long ago it was released, you can go to our website, you can go to any respectable record store and you can find it. The idea behind the limited edition stuff is record collectors are a truly mad bunch of people. And there's an idea of, it's part of collecting records is the hunt, the look for something. If you can just go to any corner store and buy a copy of this limited record, what's the fun in it? So we've done crazy things where, you know, we've released records via helium balloons. In previous incarnations, we've hid records in reupholstered furniture, things of that nature, to the point where we see our location in Nashville is really unique. Across the street from us is a homeless shelter. Behind us is a homeless shelter. Behind that is a methadone clinic. Next door to us is a swingers club. At the end of the block, when we first started, was another swingers club that eventually burned down. So, you know, this is the prime area.
Where do these guys come?
This is in Nashville, not in Detroit. We would start releasing, we would do these limited edition records that you could only buy in the shop. So, you know, what's common today is people think that they should just be able to go online and buy something. Everyone has instant gratification. And when you fly in the face of that, people get really, really mad. And we make them, you know, limit one per customer, things of that nature. Well, it got so desirable in our location that there was a businessman who started hiring homeless people to wait in line to buy our records, and he'd give them $5-10 each, and then he would put them on eBay. For example, we have a record that we released called the Triple Decker record, which is basically a 7-inch vinyl 45 sealed inside a 12-inch. The only way you can get to it is break it, and it's this kind of idea of, do you buy records because you want to listen to them or because you want to have an object? Anyways, we made 300 of those. We sold them out of our storefront, $30 each. That same day, they were selling for $500 on eBay. Some might say that's we should just be selling them for $500, not this guy employing the homeless of Nashville neighborhoods. But it's kind of more about creating something than necessarily getting the most amount, you know, maximizing the profits off of it.
Well, I think it's true, and brands have always been about the stories. That you buy a brand in part because of the story it allows you to tell about yourself. And Bridget, you and I have talked about how luxury brands maybe are suffering a little bit. People don't necessarily want to just tell the story about, see this fancy label. They want to really do something deeper. And I do think that the story that your fans get to tell is that how hard they work for that record. And I know that this part of the story people tell about Hetty is, first, it's a fantastic beer, and second, look at all the stuff we did to go out of our way to get that beer. It's a big part of it. And it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing.
Which is funny, because you used the word scarcity. And, you know, to Jen and I, for 8.5 years, I don't think I ever brewed more than 400 barrels in a year at that pub. Now, we make over 9,000 barrels a year, and people tell us that we're purposefully limiting our production and accusing us of that. And it's like, you gotta be kidding me. I'm making an ocean of beer, in my opinion. And we're not driving this by trying to make it scarce. It's scarce because people are tuned into it and they appreciate it and they want it, and they will go to those extreme measures of driving hours and hours to get it, or going to a record store and waiting in line and be sure that you get one of those records. And, you know, when people accuse us of that and say, oh, well, I should be able to get that in California, it's like, should you? You know, I don't think you should. And the reference I always use is when I come to Manhattan, I go to Lombardi's. I don't complain that I can't get my large cheese pizza from Lombardi's in Vermont. I look forward to it when I come to the city. I know I'm going to get it. And when I walk out the door, I might not be back for 5 more years, but I'm not going to complain about it. I'm going to look forward to that next time I can get it.
Yeah, makes sense. For Shinola, what story does owning a Shinola watch, for instance, allow people to tell about themselves? Or what do they, when they talk to their friends?
It's interesting because I'll, you know, fly around for work or whatever, and I'll be on a plane, not just one, going back and forth to Detroit, and I'll see somebody with a watch on, and they'll say, oh, you know, nice watch. And they launch into the story of, oh my God, do you know Shinola? Shinola is this brand, they're based in Detroit, oh, check it out, who are their reps? You know, and they just go, you know.
I've been with you, heard this exact same thing, which was when we were out to eat, not to steal your story, but we were out to eat in Nashville with a couple other, with Jacques and Tom, were other bigwigs at Shinola. I think bigwig is the official term, right?
Yes.
And Jacques, it's a dark steakhouse, and Jacques looks probably about 30 feet away, and he says, the guy's wearing a Shinola. I'm like, wow, pretty cool, eagle eyes. The guy walks past, going to the restroom or something, and Jacques just says, hey, do you like that watch? And absolutely everything Bridget says totally happens. Oh my God, there's this company from Detroit, and he goes on for about 5 minutes, and Jacques just shaking his head. He's like, yeah, that's our company. Really? Like, yeah, if you ever make it to Detroit, come on by, we'll show you around the factory. And the guy was just, you know, he had multiple watches. He's like, I got 3 of them at home.
He invited Jacques to, they were going to see some.
They're going to do the hockey game.
That was
yeah.
Is there a better experience for a chief marketing officer to have?
It's amazing, and what I really love about it is, so far, every time I've heard the story told back to me, it's accurate. And that part is so important. Because I have worked for other companies, people say, oh yeah, that brand that does this, and then you're like, oh God, no. That's so that part is really exciting for me.
So we have, it's telling me 3 minutes left here, and I'm sure you guys have questions for the panelists here. So let's open it up here. And I'm sure we have time for a few questions. So, how about right here?
You talked about how brands are buying up craft brews, and I'm sure it's happening in other industries too, where the corporate reaction is to buy the small innovators.
Corporate overlords, yes.
Yeah. So how could a large brand participate and share the market so that it's not an us versus them?
Well, I guess that's a tricky question. I guess it depends on what your goals are when you set that business up. Our goal is to stay small and to not lose that soul. Once you've lost that soul, it's pretty hard to get that back. I find that it's kind of, they're in that scrambling position where they've lost the legitimacy to brew and to market craft beer. It's not to say they certainly couldn't make it. You know, out at Coors Field, Coors put a brewery in Coors Field, which is where that Blue Moon wit beer was born out of that brewery. Now it's this massive brand for Coors. Those guys know how to brew. I mean, they make amazing beer and all styles you could ever imagine. But when that tag is on it, Coors, you immediately, people associate all of the baggage that comes along with it. So it's a tricky thing for them to do, and I find they did attempt to brew craft beer. You saw it 10, 15 years ago when Budweiser was putting out pale ales and stuff like that, but they just flopped. And so now they're shifting their strategy. Well, if we can't make it and be legitimate, we're going to buy these guys up because they're already established and legitimate. And it's just a funny way of going about it.
I was trying to put the thinking cap on for all the brand people out here. Like, how do you deal with this phenomenon?
Well, I think there are examples out there. I think it is tricky. Honest Tea is an example I like to use. They sold to Coca-Cola, but the owner maintained absolute control over manufacturing product and was really using Coca-Cola for its distribution capability. And I think he would say, and its Honest Tea's customers would say, they manage that balance well. So let's get to some other questions too. Right here. Yeah. Go next.
Hi, thank you. I've been fascinated by the categories and the intersection of craft across brands, and I guess I'm trying to understand, is this now a lifestyle, or are there commonalities, do you think, between the three of your consumers? Are they seeking out this same attribute in other categories, or is this siloed within your own footprint?
I think it's the idea that now more than ever you can have near infinite options in anything you do in your life, whether it's what kind of music you listen to, how you listen to that music, what kind of beer, what kind of watch, all that stuff. Whereas before, pre-internet proliferation, you were kind of limited to what effort you were willing to put into something. Now, if that just meant, I need a watch, I'm just going to go to Sears, whatever they have at Sears is my availability. Now people have the ability to, if you want to be really, really knowledgeable and know deeply about where your beer comes from or who pressed the record that you're looking to buy, you have the ability to do that, whereas even 15, 20 years ago, that would have just been near impossible.
And I think, absolutely, and I think quality is across these categories. Provenance, like really understanding where these things come from. In a sense of story or mission, I think people really want to look past and see the brand as a lens, not a surface, you know. I think we've heard that across these folks.
Can I just follow up and ask, how big is this segment of the market? Meaning, how as you kind of look at the amount of consumers who are touched or respond this way, is this, you talked about 10%, perhaps you said of the craft beer, is this 10% of the market? Is this a bigger segment?
I don't know what Ben Records, like, represents.
I was told there wasn't going to be any math portion. I think, you know, interestingly enough, Kanye West, not that he says a lot of things that he doesn't follow up on, but he said yesterday, he said he's no longer releasing CDs. It's going to be streaming and vinyl. That's kind of my hope for the world. I hate CDs. They're frisbees and coasters at this point. But if people still want CDs, we're going to make them until we're by no means trying to dictate how people have to listen to something. But in terms of market, it's increasingly even harder for me to tell. I know if people want the Hateful Eight vinyl soundtrack, I can tell the demand on that. When we put it out and we sell out really quick, okay, it's a bigger demand than we thought. But that changes release to release, week to week.
As far as my opinion on that, I see it as a sea change. When craft beer first came onto the scene in the late 70s and early 80s, it has done nothing but climb. It has been a long, hard road to readjust people's palates to what we now create. But now that it is out there, and we have done that, and we've done all that groundwork, the sky's the limit. There are teenagers, as we speak, stealing double IPAs out of their dad's fridge. They're not stealing their Budweisers necessarily. And when they open that fridge, they're not faced with the sea of Budweiser. It's a fridge of craft beer. And so I can't see that kid growing up someday and saying, I can't wait to have my first Miller Lite.
Well, in fact,
The younger consumer's a good point there.
Yeah.
I mean, the under 30, the M word, I've seen it, but you know, that audience, you know, today are asking those questions. So it's not this niche thing in a corner or a fad. The consumer today, and for us, it runs across many age groups, cares about where their products are coming from. Certainly, the under 30 generation absolutely is asking these questions. So I definitely think there's opportunities. Certainly, we're in it. We're passionate. It's a business that we want to be profitable. So we do believe in it, and it can be a business. It just, when it gets to the point of like a big multinational corporation where, you know, it might be a little bit more difficult to achieve this kind of storytelling.
right. It's a great question about what percentage where it's going to net out. But I do know that, to back up John's point, the Wall Street Journal had an article that said that 40% of millennial beer drinkers have never tried a Budweiser, which is, I'll tell you, wasn't the case in the 70s, right? I'm sorry, you've been waiting for a little while.
Sure, thank you very much. So when I was a kid, I used to go around to the curb and collect garbage from people emptying out their homes, and I used to build things. And I used to put them in bylines and sell it, pay 70% if I sold it, and pay nothing to bylines if I didn't sell it. Fast forward, and in the museum business, science centers, there's a big movement called maker spaces. And all of our museums, and we're building one right now, as a matter of fact, where kids are really having interest in making things. They take apart things, they repurpose the parts, they invent something. There's a movement across the United States. There's a large makers fair in near the World's Fair grounds in Queens. So people sort of rediscovering this tinkering and this manufacturing and this building. Looking forward within 10 years or so, within the communities that you work, do you hear people saying that I'd like to open up, you know, textile manufacturing again? I'd like to open up wood furniture manufacturing. I'd like to bring back leather tanning and making gloves in the United States, again, shoemaking. I mean, all of these things that have turned into this mass production with no personality. Do you see that something coming back in force? Not just being little niche things, but being a large manufacturing economy or community?
It's a great question. The maker movement's huge. I'd love to maybe, Bridget, Detroit, there's a lot of stories about becoming a maker town again. Can you talk about that? What are you seeing?
It's definitely coming back. If you look at the success of Etsy, for instance, you know, where you have, and it's predominantly women who are selling on Etsy, who are making things on their kitchen table or, you know, in their basement, and then have grown their business to, you know, $1 million business, and now are seeking out manufacturing outside of their home or not doing it themselves. It started as, you know, all people making the products themselves. That's a huge indicator of people wanting to get into this, wanting to get into the business of making things again. I come from a manufacturing background. My mother immigrated from Italy, worked in a factory in Midtown, and so I grew up on the factory floor, literally. My brother got in the business, you know, after production went offshore. He held on to his machines and hoped that it would come back. It is coming back. There's a number of factors of why that's happening, but it absolutely is coming back, and I think people want to be connected to knowing how to make things. I mean, especially in this country, we were known for making things, and not only making things, but making great, long-lasting products, and that is coming back, especially in Detroit. Detroit, you know, where you have space and still, you know, affordable rent, where you can do these things, and a community of people around you who are supporting you. We're seeing it in Detroit, but we're seeing it in cities all over the U.S.
When I think of Vermont as a maker state.
And I think it's a generational thing too. I think of the younger generation of people, they see that. I think there's a lot of people that want to be entrepreneurs, that want to have their own business, and they're trying to figure out what they can do to, what are they going to do? What are you going to make? I remember being very young. My grandfather, he immigrated from Germany, and he was a baker. And very early on, I knew, no offense to everybody in a suit and tie, I knew that I did not want to wear a suit and tie for the rest of my life. I needed to make something. I needed, at the end of the day, to have something tangible sitting in front of me that I could take pride in. I couldn't, my father was a stockbroker, and God bless him, I watched him do that every day. Not for me, you know? So when I came on to brewing, when I discovered brewing craft beer, this light went off, and all of a sudden I had that focus, and that it didn't matter. Whatever I had to do, I was going to do until I achieved that, and that's what I was going to do for a living. So it, you know, it was not a question really of if, it was when.
Well, so I think we're, speaking of lights going out, that one just went off, which means our time is up. But what I wanted to say is I think you can draw a line from Linda Goff at GE, her presentation this morning, and the refocusing of GE on a maker brand. This is a brand around inventiveness, back to its very core. They're not interested in financial services and financial engineering anymore, and I think in part that's GE shrewdly understanding values have shifted back towards we should be a society that makes things. There's value in that. So I think that's makes me optimistic at least. But anyway, thank you so much, and thank you.